Welcome everyone. Today I'm going to review the Knob Creek 18-year Batch 2. Now, is it worth the hunt? Stay tuned to find out. Welcome back to the Bourbon Retriever, where I go out in the wild, hunt bourbon, and bring it back for you. I was lucky enough to grab the Knob Creek 18-year Batch 2 at a local liquor store in Maryland, BK's. Highly recommend stopping by if you haven't been. Great staff, good selection, good prices. You really can't beat it in the area. So Batch 2 is very similar to Batch 1. It comes at 100 proof. It has a lot of the same tasting notes. It says that it's going to be full-bodied, caramelized oak with hints of sweet baking spices. It's aged at least 18 years. It could be older. So I tried to search to see if I could find any additional specs on this bottle. If there's any differences between Batch 1, did they use a different number of barrels? Did they come from a different part of the warehouse? Maybe is there anything older in this blend? But I couldn't find any press releases coming out of Knob Creek. So the MSRP comes in at $170. That is a little steep, but with the age that we're doing with bourbon today, it is about $10 per year. So while I wouldn't consider this a value bourbon, the pricing on it is fair. There are many bourbons that are much younger and command a much higher price point. So let's open it up and see what it's like. I'm glad that Knob Creek fixed their wax problems. These used to be some of the hardest bottles to open, but I don't know if they changed the wax they're using or they have a better adhesive, but they come off a lot easier now. All right, first impressions on the nose. So on the nose, oak is definitely the most prominent note, which is something you'd expect and hope to get from an 18-year-old bourbon, but it's not over oaked. It's not reminding me of the Elijah Craig 18-year. That is very, very prominent oak. This is balanced. There is some sweetness there to it. I'm trying to pick out what the sweetness is. It is reminding me a little bit of Buffalo Trace. I'm getting a little bit of a cherry there, but it's not the darker cherry you get from Buffalo Trace. This is more of a light, airy cherry. So overall, I'm a big fan of the nose so far. Very balanced, right up my alley. Onto the palate. So on the palate, on the tip of the tongue, the first thing you get is some oak, but it's a nice sweet oak. And it's not an artificial sweetness. And then moving to the middle of the palate, it's just a caramel bomb. It feels like I'm just drinking syrup caramel, but it's not overpowering. It is pretty single noted in the mid palate. It doesn't elevate. There's not a lot of complexity to it. And it kind of dies off a little bit. But when it comes back on the back palate, that's where you get the spice, a lot of the bacon spices it mentions to help round it out a bit. Overall, I'm enjoying this pour. You get a couple different flavors throughout the drinking process. At the beginning, you get that oak, turns into this nice sweet caramel, and at the end, you get the baking spices. If you're someone who is a proof hound, this might not be your cup of tea. It is coming at 100 proof, so it doesn't have the finish that many barrel proof products have. But for a 100 proofer, this packs a ton of flavor. So many of you out there are probably wondering, how does Batch 2 compare to Batch 1? Is it better, worse, about the same? Unfortunately, I don't own Batch 1, but my good friend Taylor Folds owns Batch 1, and he was generous enough to let me borrow it today. Batch 1, it came in a nice box, much better presentation, and it was the same price at $170. But I understand why they had the box for Batch 1. It was their 30th anniversary, so they probably won't have the box going forward either. All right, so Batch 1, we opened this when Taylor got it last year, so it's been open for about a year. Not too much has come out of it. I'll show you here on the back. So we still got a pretty good amount of juice left, but it has a good amount of air in there that help it change its profile a little bit. And I've noticed, especially with double oaks or aged bourbon, once they get a little bit of air in there, the oakiness comes out a lot more in the palate and the nose, which rings true on Batch 1. I'm smelling this now, and the oak is a lot more prominent. I'd say Batch 1 has a much darker oak. Yeah, Batch 1, I would say it's a lot of the same flavor profiles, but Batch 1 is more like a burnt caramel and burnt wood. I wonder if Batch 2, though, will transition to that after it has a little more air into it. I remember me and Taylor opened Batch 1 the first time. I remember thinking it was pretty flat and not much going on. I would say the mid palate and the finish on Batch 1 is very faint. Batch 2 is much better in the mid palate and finish. There's almost no finish on Batch 1. and go back to batch 2. Now, before we reveal which bottle is better, hit that subscribe button if you're enjoying this content. That way you don't miss any future posts going forward. Additionally, I am a small channel. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subs so I can do a live stream with you guys. Maybe bring on my pup Watson if that's something you'd like, and just have a good time with all you guys. Yeah, wow, so batch 2, I am a fan of batch 2. I think it is better than batch 1. The middle palate, it's much more full-bodied. It coats the full mouth, and it does evolve more into that sweetness, whereas batch 1, it kind of hides it a little bit. You get that first taste and then it kind of trails off. Batch 2, you get that taste. The caramel kind of builds a little bit, helps fill your mouth, and at the end you do get that baking spice. Whereas in batch 1, you get that initial caramel, the wood, and then it just tails off a little bit, and there really isn't much of a finish, if any. So if I had to compare batch 1 to batch 2 I think is better than batch 1. But I'll break it down about which bottle is better in which categories. So in batch 1, I think it wins on nose and the beginning of the palate. It's much darker, it's a little bit burnt, and it's closer to my palate and flavor profile. Whereas batch 2, it's a little sweeter and lighter. You still get that oak notes, but it's not over oaked. But where batch 2 comes out ahead of batch 1 is the mid to late palate. The mid palate is much better, and then you also get a finish with it, which is just non-existent in batch 1. All right, now it comes down to, should you chase this? It does come in at $170. That is very pricey. For the average consumer, I would say just go and buy Knob Creek 12. For your dollar, you'll get close, not the same experience, but pretty close to the same experience, and it's about a third of the cost. However, if you are a person who buys the LEs and routinely spends $200, this is a bottle I would chase. I do enjoy the flavors that are coming through in this, and I think it is a nice pour. If you like batch 1, should you chase batch 2? I would say yes. It has a lot of the same flavors as batch 1, but it's overall a much better experience. So coming in at $170, I wouldn't call it a value buy, but for what you're paying and what you can get in the market for that price, I think it's a good pour for that price. I do enjoy it. I don't think I'll buy a backup of it, but I'm very happy that I purchased it. Let me know in the comments if you want me to do a blind with the Knob Creek 18 versus some of the other products. They're 9-year, they're 12-year, and 15. If that's something you'd be interested in, let me know. If you're enjoying this content, before you head out, check out this video or this video, and until next time, cheers.